The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Piotch, Nevada, and Grace Palmer didn't even flinch anymore as she arranged the wildflowers in their tin buckets outside the general store. Death had taken so much from her already that the violence of this rough mining town in 1872 barely registered against the constant ache in her chest where her heart used to be. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. Thomas had been dead for 8 months now, crushed in a mining collapse that left her with nothing but debts, a rented room above the bakery, and calloused hands that knew how to coax beauty from the harsh Nevada soil. Every morning before dawn, she walked 3 miles outside town to where a small creek fed a hidden meadow, and there she gathered whatever blooms the unforgiving land was willing to give. Indian paintbrush, desert marigolds, globe mallows, and sometimes, if she was lucky, the delicate purple flowers of the scorpion weed that grew in the shade of the rocks. Grace pushed a strand of honey-colored hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Her dress was faded calico, mended so many times the original pattern was hard to discern. The morning sun was already brutal, promising another scorching day. She had made $2 this week. The rent was $3 due in 5 days. The numbers didn't add up, they never did, but she would figure something out. She always did. "Fresh flowers," she called out, her voice hoarse from disuse. She didn't talk much these days except to announce her wares or respond to the occasional customer. "Brighten your home, brighten your day." Most people walked past without a glance. Miners heading to the silver claims, ladies in their nicer dresses heading to the church for the sewing circle, children running wild through the streets. Piotch was a town that had exploded almost overnight when silver was discovered, and it carried all the chaos and danger such rapid growth invited. They said a man was buried in the cemetery every day, and Grace believed it. She was about to sit down on the wooden crate she used as a stool when she saw him. A cowboy, tall and lean, leading his horse down the main street. He moved with the easy gait of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than on his feet, and even from a distance, there was something about him that caught her attention. Maybe it was the way he seemed to be taking in everything around him with quiet observation, or maybe it was simply that he was a stranger, and strangers sometimes bought flowers to soften the harsh edges of this rough town. He stopped in front of her buckets, and Grace got a better look at him. He was younger than she had first thought, probably around 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble. His clothes were worn but clean, and he wore his gun low on his hip with the casual comfort of someone who knew how to use it. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was low and pleasant, with a drawl that suggested Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "Sir," Grace replied, standing straighter, "would you like some flowers? They're fresh picked this morning." He looked at the buckets, really looked at them in a way that most people didn't. "These are real pretty. You grow them yourself. I gather them from a meadow outside town." "Wild flowers, but they last just as long as cultivated ones if you change the water regular." The cowboy nodded slowly, still examining the blooms. "How much?" 10 cents a bunch. She watched him, trying to gauge his interest. "Or 3 bunches for a quarter. I'll take all of them." Grace blinked. "I'm sorry, all of them," he repeated, meeting her eyes for the first time. His gaze was direct but not aggressive, and she noticed something in those creek water eyes that looked like loneliness. "How many bunches you got there?" She did a quick count, her heart starting to beat faster. 12 bunches, sir. That would be $1.20. He reached into his pocket without hesitation and pulled out $2 silver, placing them in her palm. "Keep the change, and the buckets, I'll bring them back tomorrow." Grace stared at the coins in her hand, then up at him. "Sir, this is too much. And why would you need 12 bunches of flowers?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe I just like flowers, and maybe I think you could use a good day." Before she could respond, he had gathered up all the buckets and loaded them carefully into his saddlebags and across his horse's back. The animal, a sturdy bay gelding, didn't seem to mind being decorated with wildflowers. "What's your name, madam?" he asked as he worked. "Grace Palmer," she heard herself say. "I'm widowed. I'm sorry for your loss." He said it simply, without the awkward sympathy that usually made her want to escape. "I'm Ryder Garrett, just rode in yesterday looking for work." "There's always work in the mines if you're not particular about danger." "I prefer to work above ground when I can, horses mostly. I heard the stage company might be hiring." Grace watched him secure the last bucket. "Mr. Garrett, truly, you don't need all these flowers. Let me give you back some of your money." "No, madam." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mrs. Palmer, same time. I'm here every morning, weather permitting." He touched his hat brim again and rode off, his horse now a moving garden of desert blooms. Grace stood there holding the $2 silver, watching him disappear around the corner toward the boarding house. For the first time in 8 months, something other than grief stirred in her chest. She wasn't sure what to call it yet, but it felt almost like curiosity. That night, lying in her small rented room, Grace counted her money by candlelight. With what Ryder Garrett had given her, she could pay rent and still have enough left over for food. The tight knot of anxiety in her stomach loosened slightly. She tried not to think about the cowboy with the lonely eyes who had bought every flower she had. Tried not to wonder what he had done with them, or why he had really bought them. Men didn't just buy 12 bunches of wildflowers on a whim. She fell asleep, with the scent of bread rising in the bakery, below mixing with the memory of desert blooms. The next morning, Grace was up even earlier than usual. She told herself it was because she needed to gather more flowers to replace what she had sold, that it had nothing to do with Ryder Garrett's promise to return the buckets. But she found herself taking a little more care with her appearance, braiding her hair more neatly, pinching her cheeks to bring color to them. The walk to the meadow was peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. She knew the path by heart now, could follow it by starlight alone. The air was cool, a brief respite before the heat of the day settled in. She reached her secret place just as the sun was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The meadow was smaller than it had been in spring, the summer heat taking its toll, but there were still flowers to be found if you knew where to look. Grace worked quickly, her hands sure and practiced. She talked to the flowers as she picked them, thanking them for their beauty, for their sacrifice. Thomas used to tease her about that, but gently, saying it was one of the things he loved about her. The grief hit her suddenly, as it sometimes did. A wave of it so strong she had to sit down right there in the dirt, her basket half full, and just breathe through it. Thomas had been a good man, kind and hardworking. Their marriage had been arranged by their families, but they had grown to care for each other. It wasn't the passionate love of dime novels, but it had been comfortable and warm. His death had left a hole in her life that went beyond the financial hardship. She let herself cry for a few minutes, then wiped her eyes and got back to work. The flowers wouldn't pick themselves, and she had a living to make. By the time she made it back to town and set up outside the general store, the sun was well up and Piotch was coming to life. The usual chaos of a mining town in full swing surrounded her. She had just finished arranging her flowers when she saw Ryder Garrett walking toward her, her tin buckets stacked in his arms. "Morning, Mrs. Palmer," he said, setting the buckets down gently. They had been cleaned, she noticed, scrubbed until they shone. "Good morning, Mr. Garrett. Thank you for returning these. You didn't have to clean them. Seemed the right thing to do." He looked at her freshly gathered flowers. "You've been busy already today." "The flowers are best picked early before the heat gets to them," he nodded, studying the new bunches. "I'll take all of them again." Grace had prepared herself for this possibility, but it still caught her off guard. "Mr. Garrett, I appreciate your business, but I have to ask, what are you doing with all these flowers?" He met her eyes and she saw that loneliness again, stark and unguarded for just a moment before he looked away. "Does it matter? I suppose not. I just don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't do things out of obligation, Mrs. Palmer." He pulled out money again. "I do them because I want to." "How much today?" She had 14 bunches. He gave her $2 again, refusing change. As he loaded the flowers, she found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Did you find work with the stage company?" "I did. Start next week, tending their horses and doing repairs on the coaches. It's good work." "I'm glad to hear it." He paused, a bucket of Indian paintbrush in his hands. "Mrs. Palmer, would you think me too forward if I asked to buy you lunch today? There's a decent restaurant down the street and I'd appreciate the company." Grace's first instinct was to refuse. She was in mourning, it wouldn't be proper, what would people think? But then she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw only honest hope in his face. No ulterior motives, no inappropriate intentions, just a lonely man asking for company over a meal. "I don't close up here until noon," she said slowly. "I can wait, or I could come back at noon." "Come back at noon," she decided. "And Mr. Garrett, thank you for asking." His smile was small but genuine. "Thank you for saying yes, madam." He left with his flowers, and Grace sat down on her crate, wondering what she had just agreed to. The other shopkeepers were already looking at her with curiosity. Mrs. Chen from the laundry gave her a knowing smile. Grace felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her chin up. She was a widow, yes, but she was also a grown woman. She could have lunch with whomever she pleased. The morning passed slowly. She sold 3 bunches to a miner who wanted to apologize to his wife, and 1 bunch to the doctor's wife who liked to have fresh flowers in the waiting room. By the time noon arrived, she had made another 60 cents. It wasn't the windfall of Ryder's purchases, but every bit helped. He appeared right on time, having changed into a cleaner shirt. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked down the dusty street to the restaurant, a surprisingly nice establishment run by a French couple who had come west looking for fortune and found it in feeding hungry miners. The proprietor, Monsieur Blanc, showed them to a small table near the window. Grace couldn't remember the last time she had eaten in a restaurant. Probably before Thomas died, back when they still had a little money to spare for such luxuries. "Order whatever you like," Ryder said, studying the handwritten menu on the wall. "Mr. Garrett, I can't let you pay for an expensive meal." "It's just lunch, Mrs. Palmer, and please call me Ryder. Mr. Garrett makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and tie. Only if you call me Grace." "Grace." He said her name like he was tasting it, seeing how it felt. "That suits you." They ordered roast chicken and vegetables, with fresh bread and butter. As they waited for the food, an awkward silence settled over the table. Grace folded her hands in her lap, unsure what to say. It had been so long since she had engaged in social conversation with anyone, let alone a man who wasn't a customer. "Where are you from, Ryder?" she finally asked. "Texas originally. Little town called Gonzales. My family had a ranch there, cattle mostly." "Had." His expression darkened slightly. "Drought took most of the herd 5 years back. My father sold what was left and moved the family to San Antonio. I was 22, figured it was time to make my own way. Been drifting since then, picking up work where I can find it. That must be lonely." "It is," he admitted. "What about you? Are you from Nevada, Missouri?" "My parents brought me west when I was 16. They had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines." She smiled sadly. "They never did. They both caught fever and died within a week of each other 3 years ago. I married Thomas a few months after that. He was a good man, a hard worker, but the mine doesn't care how good you are." "I'm sorry," Ryder said, and she could tell he meant it. "That's a lot of loss for one person to carry. We all carry our burdens. Some are just heavier than others." The food arrived, and it was delicious. Grace ate slowly, savoring each bite. She hadn't realized how hungry she had been, how long it had been since she had eaten a proper meal. She usually subsisted on bread and cheese, whatever was cheapest and would keep her going. As they ate, the conversation came easier. Ryder told her about the places he had been, the characters he had met on the road. He had a way of telling stories that made her smile, something she hadn't done in what felt like forever. She found herself relaxing, the tight guard she usually kept around herself loosening just a little. "Can I ask you something?" Ryder said as they finished their meal. "And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. All right." "Why flowers?" "Of all the things you could do to make money, why that?" Grace considered the question. "Because they're beautiful. Because in a place like this, where everything is hard and dirty and violent, flowers are a reminder that gentle things still exist. And because when I'm out in that meadow in the early morning picking them, I feel close to something peaceful. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He leaned back in his chair, regarding her with those creek water eyes. "You're an unusual woman, Grace Palmer." "I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not." "It's definitely a compliment." When they finished eating and stepped back outside, the afternoon heat hit them like a physical force. Grace pulled her bonnet forward to shade her face. "Thank you for lunch," she said. "That was kind of you. Would you let me do it again?" "Tomorrow, maybe." She knew she should say no. Knew that accepting his attention 2 days in a row would start tongues wagging all over town. But when she looked at him, she saw only genuine interest, only that loneliness that mirrored her own. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." His smile was worth whatever gossip might come. That night, lying in bed, Grace thought about Ryder Garrett, about the way he looked at her like she was someone worth looking at, about how easy it had been to talk to him, to smile. The guilt came then, sharp and familiar. Thomas had only been dead 8 months. Was it wrong to enjoy another man's company so soon? Was she betraying his memory? But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still living. Surely he would want her to find some happiness, some small moments of light in the darkness. She fell asleep with her thoughts in turmoil, but her dreams were gentler than they had been in months. The pattern continued. Every morning, Ryder would come to buy all her flowers. Every afternoon, they would have lunch together. Grace stopped questioning why he bought so many blooms. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that his purchases allowed her to pay rent, to buy food, to have a small cushion of savings building up. What mattered was the way her heart lifted when she saw him walking toward her in the morning. After a week of this, Mrs. Chen finally cornered her as Grace was carrying water from the pump. "That cowboy," the older woman said without preamble, "he is sweet on you. We're just friends, Mrs. Chen. Friends do not look at friends the way he looks at you. And friends do not blush the way you blush when he comes around." Grace felt her cheeks warm, proving Mrs. Chen's point. "It's too soon. Thomas hasn't even been gone a year." "Thomas is dead, child. You are alive. There is no shame in living." The words stayed with Grace. There is no shame in living. She repeated them to herself like a prayer. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Ryder asked if he could walk her to the meadow one morning. Grace hesitated, then agreed. It was her secret place, but somehow the thought of sharing it with him didn't feel like an intrusion. They left before dawn, walking through the sleeping town and out into the open desert. Ryder led his horse, and the three of them made their way along the path Grace had worn with her daily trips. He didn't talk much, just walked beside her in comfortable silence. When they reached the meadow and the sun started to rise, Grace heard him draw in a sharp breath. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "It is, isn't it? It's my favorite place in the whole world." She showed him which flowers to pick and which to leave, how to cut the stems at an angle so they would last longer. He was a quick learner, his hands surprisingly gentle for someone who worked with horses and leather. They worked together as the sun climbed higher, filling her basket with blooms. "Can I tell you something?" Ryder said as they were finishing up. "Of course. I've been spreading those flowers on graves." Grace turned to look at him, surprised. "What?" "The cemetery. Every day I take those flowers and I put them on the graves that don't have any. The ones that are just bare dirt, where nobody comes to visit." He met her eyes. "This town puts people in the ground every day, and half of them die alone with nobody to mourn them. I thought maybe having flowers might make it less lonely somehow." Something in Grace's chest cracked open. She had wondered, had imagined all sorts of reasons for his purchases, but this had never occurred to her. He was buying flowers for the forgotten dead. "That's the kindest thing I've ever heard," she whispered. "I started doing it because of my brother. Jake died 3 years ago, got shot in a card game in some dusty town in Arizona. They buried him in an unmarked grave, and I never even knew where it was until 6 months later. I couldn't visit him, couldn't leave him flowers, couldn't say goodbye. So I started doing it for other people's brothers, other people's sons and daughters." Without thinking, Grace reached out and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. "You're a good man, Ryder Garrett. I'm trying to be." They stood there in the morning light, hands clasped, surrounded by wildflowers. Grace felt something shift inside her, like a door she had thought sealed shut forever creaking open just a crack. On the walk back to town, Ryder told her more about his brother. About how Jake had been wild and reckless, always chasing the next adventure. About how much he missed him, how the grief sometimes still hit him out of nowhere. "Does it get easier?" he asked. "The missing them, it gets different," Grace said. "The sharp edges wear down until it's more of an ache than a stabbing pain. You learn to carry it. I don't know if I'm carrying it right. There is no right way. There's just the way that gets you through each day." When they reached town, he helped her set up her flower stand, then bought all the flowers as usual. But before he left, he turned back to her. "Grace, I know it hasn't been very long since your husband passed. I know people will talk, and I know you're still grieving. But I need you to know that I'm courting you, deliberately, with intention. I wanted to be clear about that." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Ryder, you don't have to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I'll keep coming around as long as you'll let me, and I won't push for more than you're ready to give. But I care about you, Grace. I want you to know that." He left before she could formulate a response, walking toward the cemetery with his arms full of flowers. Grace sat down on her crate, her legs suddenly shaky. He was courting her. A good man, a kind man, was openly declaring his intention to court her. The guilt rose up, but softer this time. She thought about Thomas, about their gentle, comfortable marriage. He had been practical about everything, including death. Once when they passed a funeral, he had told her that if anything happened to him, she shouldn't waste her life in mourning. "Live, Gracie," he had said. "That's all any of us can do." Maybe it was time to take that advice. That evening, Grace did something she hadn't done since before Thomas died. She took out the small mirror from her trunk and really looked at herself. Grief had made her thin, carved hollows under her cheekbones and shadows under her eyes, but she was still young, still alive. Her honey-colored hair still shone when she brushed it out. Her eyes still held light when she let them. She thought about Ryder, about his quiet kindness, his lonely eyes that seemed to see her in a way no one else did. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she saw him, the way talking to him felt as easy as breathing. The next morning, when he came to buy flowers, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "I accept." He paused in the act of reaching for a bucket. "Accept what? Your courtship." "I accept your intention to court me, Ryder Garrett, and I want you to know that I care about you too." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. "Yeah. Yes." He set down the flowers and took both her hands in his, right there on the street where everyone could see. "You've made me very happy, Grace Palmer. You make me happy too. I didn't think I could feel happy again, but you make me feel like maybe I can." From that day forward, things changed between them. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, precious ways. He still bought all her flowers every morning, but now he would sometimes touch her hand when he took the buckets, let his fingers linger for just a moment. They still had lunch together every day, but now they would sit a little closer. And once he reached across the table to brush a crumb from the corner of her mouth, his thumb soft against her skin. Piotch was a rough town, but even rough towns had their social customs. Ryder started attending church on Sundays, sitting in the back row where Grace sat alone. After services, he would walk her back to her room, and they would stand outside the bakery talking until the sun was high overhead. On one such Sunday, about a month after they had started courting officially, Ryder asked if she would like to go on a real outing with him. There was a ranch outside of town, owned by a family named the Richardsons, who were having a barn dance that Saturday night. "I'd like to take you if you'd be willing to go," he said. "I know it's asking a lot being seen together like that. People will definitely talk." "Let them talk," Grace said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'd love to go." That week passed in a blur of anticipation and nervousness. Grace had one nice dress, a blue calico that had been her Sunday best. She washed it carefully, mended a small tear in the hem, pressed it with the iron she borrowed from Mrs. Chen. She felt like a girl again, getting ready for her first dance. Saturday evening, Ryder showed up at the bakery driving a borrowed wagon, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and dark pants. He helped her up onto the seat, his hands strong and sure around her waist. As they drove out of town toward the Richardson ranch, the setting sun painted the desert in shades of orange and gold. "You look beautiful," Ryder said, not taking his eyes off the road. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." "I'm nervous," he admitted. "I haven't been to a dance in years. I'm not sure I remember how." "I'm nervous too. I haven't danced since my wedding." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We'll figure it out together then." The Richardson Ranch was a sprawling affair with a large barn that had been cleared out and decorated with lanterns for the dance. There were already dozens of people there when they arrived, neighbors from miles around who had come for the music and socializing. Grace recognized a few faces from town, saw the looks of surprise and speculation when people noticed her arriving with Ryder. She lifted her chin and took his offered arm, refusing to be ashamed. She had every right to be here, every right to court again if she chose to. The music started, a lively fiddle tune that had people flooding onto the makeshift dance floor. Ryder led her out among them, and after a few stumbling steps, they found their rhythm. He was a better dancer than he had claimed, leading her through the turns with confidence. Grace laughed, actually laughed as they spun around the floor. They danced several dances, then took a break to get some punch. As they stood on the edge of the crowd, catching their breath, a woman approached them. She was older, maybe 40, with a kind face and sharp eyes. "You're the flower seller from town," she said to Grace. "I'm Martha Richardson. This is our place." "Grace Palmer, madam, thank you for having us. And you must be the cowboy who's been buying up all her flowers." Martha turned her attention to Ryder. "My husband tends the cemetery sometimes. He says someone's been putting fresh flowers on all the unmarked graves. That you?" Ryder looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Yes, madam. That's good work you're doing, kind work." Martha smiled at them both. "You two make a nice couple. Don't let the gossips tell you otherwise." She moved on to greet other guests, leaving Grace and Ryder looking at each other. "See," Ryder said softly, "not everyone thinks badly of us. I'm starting to not care what anyone thinks. Good." They danced until late into the night, until Grace's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. On the ride back to town, she leaned against Ryder's shoulder, feeling content in a way she hadn't felt in over a year. He put his arm around her, holding her close. "Thank you for tonight," she murmured. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I. Grace, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you think you could ever love again? Really love, not just companionship or convenience, but the kind of love that fills you up and makes everything else make sense?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead. "I think so. I'm starting to think so. Because I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but it's the truth. You don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know." Grace sat up to look at him properly. In the moonlight, his face was all shadows and planes, but his eyes were clear and honest. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said. "It scares me how much I feel for you, but it's real, Ryder. What I feel is real." He pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road and cupped her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes." His lips met hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been. This was fire and yearning, tenderness and passion all mixed together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Grace felt like she had been fundamentally changed. "Wow," she whispered. "Yeah," he agreed. "Wow." They drove the rest of the way back to town in comfortable silence, hands clasped together. When they reached the bakery, Ryder helped her down from the wagon and walked her to her door. "I'll see you tomorrow morning," he said. "For flowers." "For flowers," she agreed, smiling. He kissed her again, soft and sweet this time, then waited until she was safely inside before climbing back into the wagon. Grace leaned against her closed door, touching her lips, feeling like she was floating. The next months passed in a golden haze. Summer turned to fall, and the desert bloomed again with the cooler weather. Grace's flower business thrived, and with Ryder's steady work at the stage company, they both began to build something that felt like security. They spent every moment they could together. Ryder would meet her at the meadow most mornings now, helping her gather flowers in the cool dawn. They would talk about everything and nothing, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Grace told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents' dreams of wealth that never materialized. Ryder told her about life on the ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the brother he still missed every day. On Sundays after church, they would walk out into the desert, finding quiet places to sit and talk. Ryder would sketch the landscape in a little notebook he carried, revealing a talent for drawing he had never mentioned. Grace would read to him from the few books she owned, her voice carrying on the dry desert air. In November, Ryder asked her to marry him. They were in the meadow, picking the last of the season's wildflowers. The air was crisp and cool, the sky that particular shade of blue that only comes in autumn. Ryder had been quiet all morning, and Grace had been wondering what was on his mind. He set down the basket of flowers and took both her hands. "Grace Palmer, I know we've only known each other for 6 months. I know some people will say it's too fast, that you should wait longer. But I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Grace's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. "Yes, yes, Ryder, I'll marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band with a small turquoise stone set in silver. "It's not much," he said as he slid it onto her finger, "but the turquoise matches your eyes when you're happy." She kissed him, there among the wildflowers with the morning sun warming their faces. "It's perfect. You're perfect." They were married in early December, in the little church in Piotch with Mrs. Chen and Martha Richardson as witnesses. Grace wore her blue calico dress, and Ryder wore his Sunday best. The preacher kept the ceremony simple, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Ryder kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They had saved enough between them to rent a small house on the edge of town, 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it felt like a palace after Grace's single rented room. They filled it with wildflowers and laughter, building a home together one day at a time. Grace continued selling flowers, but now Ryder would help her gather them in the mornings before he went to work at the stage company. They would walk to the meadow hand in hand, talking about their plans. Ryder wanted to save enough to buy some land, maybe start a small ranch. Grace wanted to try cultivating some of the wildflowers, see if she could grow them closer to home. Their first winter together was harsh. Nevada winters could be brutal, and money was tight. There were nights when they went to bed hungry, mornings when they woke to frost on the inside of the windows. But they had each other, and somehow that made everything bearable. On the worst nights, when the wind howled and the cold seeped through every crack, they would lie in bed wrapped in every blanket they owned, and Ryder would tell her stories about Texas, about warm summer nights and cattle drives under the stars. Grace would describe Missouri springs, when everything turned green and alive after the winter. "One day," Ryder would say, "I'm going to build you a house with thick walls and a fireplace big enough to keep you warm all winter." "One day," Grace would respond, "I'm going to make you a garden full of flowers that bloom year-round." They were dreams, but they kept hope alive. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The meadow bloomed more abundantly than Grace had ever seen it, as if rewarding her for making it through the winter. Her flower business picked up, and Ryder got a raise at the stage company for being reliable and good with the horses. In late April, Grace realized she was pregnant. She sat in their little house, one hand on her still flat stomach, overwhelmed with emotion. After Thomas had died, she had thought she would never have children, had resigned herself to a life alone. Now here she was, married to a man she loved deeply, carrying his child. When Ryder came home that evening, she met him at the door. He took one look at her face and his expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant," she said simply. He froze, then slowly broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "Really? We're going to have a baby?" "Yes." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Then he set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Should I have done that? Is it safe? Are you feeling all right?" She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm fine. We're fine." "Oh, Ryder, we're going to be parents." That night they lay in bed making plans. They would need to save more money, would need to get things ready for the baby. Ryder became even more focused on work, taking any extra shifts he could get. Grace continued selling flowers as long as she could, though as her belly grew, the walks to the meadow became more difficult. Mrs. Chen and Martha Richardson became her unexpected support system. The older women gave her advice, helped her sew baby clothes from scraps of fabric, told her what to expect. The community of Piach, for all its roughness, could be surprisingly kind when it wanted to be. In December, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Grace went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth, and there were moments when Ryder, pacing outside the room, thought he might lose his mind from worry. But finally, after 18 hours, he heard the cry of a baby. Mrs. Chen came out smiling. "You have a son, a healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but well." Ryder rushed into the room to find Grace propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a quilt. He approached slowly, almost reverently. "Look what we made," Grace whispered. "Isn't he perfect?" The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. Ryder reached out a finger and the baby's hand immediately grasped it. "He's beautiful," Ryder said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you. He has your hair. And your grip. He's going to be strong." They named him Thomas Robert, honoring both Grace's first husband and Ryder's middle name. Thomas had been a good man who had taken care of Grace when she needed it, and they both felt it was right to remember him this way. Ryder never felt threatened by Grace's past. He understood that she had loved Thomas in her own way, and that love didn't diminish what they had together. Motherhood transformed Grace. She glowed with it, even through the exhaustion of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Ryder was a devoted father, coming home from work to take the baby so Grace could rest, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. They were poor but happy, making do with what they had and building their life together one small victory at a time. Grace couldn't make the long walk to the meadow anymore with a baby to care for, so Ryder would go before work, gathering flowers for her to sell from their doorstep. The business slowed, but people still came for her arrangements, which were known throughout Piach for their beauty. When Thomas was 6 months old, something remarkable happened. The owner of the stage company, impressed with Ryder's work ethic and skill with horses, offered to sell him a parcel of land on the outskirts of town at a price he could afford with small payments over time. It was 10 acres of scrubland, but it had a creek running through one corner and potential for building. Ryder came home with the news, practically vibrating with excitement. "We can build a house there, Grace. A real house, not this rental. We can have space for a garden, maybe keep some chickens and a milk cow. It won't be a big ranch, but it'll be ours." Grace looked around their cramped 2 rooms, then at her husband's hopeful face, then down at baby Thomas sleeping in his cradle. "Let's do it." They signed the papers the next week. Every spare moment Ryder had, he spent on that land, clearing brush, hauling stones for a foundation, planning where the house would go. Grace would bring Thomas and sit in the shade of one of the few trees, nursing the baby while watching her husband work. On one such afternoon, she noticed something that made her heart skip. Near the creek, in the shade of the rocks, wildflowers were growing. The same varieties she had been gathering from the meadow. The land was telling her it could support a garden. "Ryder," she called, "come look at this." He came over, wiping sweat from his forehead. She pointed to the flowers. "They grow here naturally. I could cultivate them, make a proper flower garden. We could expand the business." His eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. You could grow enough to sell to the hotels in the bigger towns, not just here in Piach." It became their shared dream. Ryder would build a house and a stable. Grace would build a garden. Together, they would create something lasting. The house took 2 years to build, with Ryder doing most of the work himself and hiring help when they could afford it. It was modest, just 4 rooms, but it had a real fireplace and thick walls and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. Grace cried when they moved in, overcome with emotion at having a real home of her own. The garden took just as long to establish. Grace worked tirelessly, learning through trial and error what the land would support. She dug irrigation channels from the creek, amended the soil with compost, protected tender seedlings from the harsh sun. Slowly, painstakingly, the garden began to flourish. By the time Thomas was 3, they had expanded Grace's flower business significantly. She grew not just wildflowers now, but cultivated varieties too. Roses that somehow survived the Nevada heat, hollyhocks that grew tall against the house, beds of marigolds and zinnias that provided constant blooms. She sold arrangements to the hotels in Piotch, and even shipped dried flowers to Virginia City and Carson City. Ryder built a small stable and bought 2 horses, which he bred and trained. Between Grace's flowers and Ryder's horses, plus his continued work at the stage company, they began to build real financial security for the first time in their lives. Life wasn't perfect. There were droughts that threatened the garden, illnesses that scared them, accidents that set them back. When Thomas was 4, he fell from the fence and broke his arm, and Grace spent 3 days barely sleeping, watching over him. When he was 5, a late frost killed half of Grace's spring flowers, representing months of work and significant lost income. But through it all, they had each other. On the hard days, Ryder would hold Grace and remind her that they had survived worse. On the days when he was discouraged, she would tell him how proud she was of everything he had built, how far they had come from that first morning when he bought all her flowers. When Thomas was 6, Grace got pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, maybe because she knew what to expect, maybe because she was healthier and less stressed than she had been the first time. In the spring, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Rose, because she was born in the flower garden among the blooming roses. Thomas was enchanted with his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly. Ryder was even more protective than he had been with Thomas, barely letting Rose out of his sight for the first few weeks. "I never knew I could love this much," he told Grace one night as they watched their children sleep. "Sometimes it scares me how much I love you all." "I know exactly what you mean," Grace replied, leaning against him. "Sometimes I think about where I was 5 years ago, selling flowers on the street corner just trying to survive. And then I look at what we have now, and it feels like a miracle." "You're the miracle, Grace. You made all of this possible. We made it possible, together." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, healthy and happy. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with animals, often following his father to the stable to help with the horses. Rose, true to her name, loved the garden and could often be found toddling among the flowers, trying to help her mother. When Thomas was 10 and Rose was 4, they had one more child, another boy they named James. By then, the property had expanded to 20 acres, the garden was famous throughout Nevada, and Ryder's horse breeding operation was thriving. They had built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream about in those early days. Grace was 34 now, laugh lines around her eyes and silver threading through her honey-colored hair. Ryder was 36, his face weathered by sun and work, but his eyes still that same creek watercolor she had fallen in love with. They had been married for 12 years, and the love between them had only deepened with time. One evening, after the children were in bed, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "You remember the first time I bought your flowers?" Ryder asked, taking her hand, Of course. I thought you were crazy buying all of them like that. I was crazy. Crazy about you from the moment I saw you standing there with your flowers, looking so determined and brave despite everything you'd been through. I wasn't brave. I was just trying to survive. That's what bravery is, Grace. Showing up every day even when everything is hard. You taught me that. She leaned her head on his shoulder. We've come a long way from that street corner in Piotch. We have. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth it to get here to have this life with you. I love you, Ryder Garrett. I loved you then when you bought all my flowers and wouldn't tell me why. I loved you when you told me you were putting them on unmarked graves. I loved you when you asked me to marry you in the meadow. And I love you now more than ever. I love you too, Grace. Forever. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. From inside the house, they could hear the occasional sound of one of the children stirring in sleep. The garden rustled in the evening breeze, filling the air with the scent of flowers. It was a good life, built on hard work and harder times, but also on love and hope and determination. From that first morning when a lonely cowboy bought every stem from a grieving widow, they had built something beautiful and lasting. Years continued to pass in their own gentle rhythm. Thomas grew into a strong young man with his father's way with horses and his mother's gentle heart. By the time he was 18, he was managing much of the horse breeding operation himself, showing a natural talent for training and an eye for good bloodlines. Rose, at 12, had transformed the flower garden into something extraordinary. She had inherited her mother's green thumb and added her own innovations, experimenting with new varieties and creating hybrid breeds that could withstand the harsh Nevada climate better than anything they had tried before. The two of them would spend hours in the garden together, mother and daughter, hands deep in the soil, talking about everything and nothing. James, at 8, was still finding his way. He loved both the horses and the garden but seemed most interested in books and learning. Ryder and Grace encouraged all of it, wanting their children to find their own paths. The town of Piotch had changed too over the years. The silver veins were starting to play out, and people were leaving for other opportunities. But the Garrett family stayed, their roots too deep now to pull up easily. Their property had become a landmark, the gardens visible from the road, a splash of color against the desert browns and grays. One spring morning, when Grace was 42 and Ryder was 44, they took a walk together to the old meadow where Grace used to gather wildflowers. They hadn't been there in years, both too busy with the children and the business. But something drew them back. The meadow was smaller than Grace remembered, reclaimed by the desert in places. But there were still flowers, still that secret pocket of beauty hidden away from the harsh world. "I miss this place," Grace said, kneeling to touch a cluster of Indian paintbrush. "I spent so many mornings here, alone with my grief." "And then you shared it with me," Ryder said, kneeling beside her. "That was when I knew you were starting to trust me. I trusted you before that. I think I trusted you from that first morning when you bought all my flowers and wouldn't let me argue about the price." He laughed. "I was so nervous that day. I had been watching you for almost a week, trying to work up the courage to talk to you. You looked so sad but also so strong. I wanted to do something, anything, to make your life a little easier. You did more than make it easier. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me love and children and a home and a purpose. You gave me everything, Ryder." "We gave each other everything," he corrected gently. "That's what love is, isn't it? Two people building something together that neither could build alone." They gathered a small bouquet of wildflowers, like they had done so many times before, and walked back to their property hand in hand. When they got home, Grace put the flowers in a vase on the kitchen table, where everyone could see them. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner as they did every night. Thomas told them about a new foal that had been born that afternoon. Rose excitedly described a new flower hybrid she was working on, and James read aloud from a book about trains that he was fascinated with. Ryder and Grace sat at either end of the table, watching their children, catching each other's eyes and sharing small smiles. After dinner, after the children had been sent to bed despite various protests, Ryder and Grace returned to their porch ritual. The sunset that evening was particularly spectacular, the whole sky on fire with color. "I've been thinking," Ryder said, "about expanding the property again. There's 20 acres adjoining ours to the south that just came up for sale. We could give Thomas his own space for the horses, let him really build that operation. What do you think? I think our son would be thrilled. Can we afford it? Just barely, but yes. The horses are doing well, and your flower business brought in more last year than ever before." "We could make it work," Grace nodded. "Then let's do it. Let's keep building. Still building after all these years. Always building. That's what life is, isn't it? You never stop building, never stop growing." 2 years later, when Thomas was 20, he married a young woman named Catherine, who had moved to Piotch with her family from California. The wedding was held in the flower garden, with Rose creating the most elaborate floral decorations anyone in the county had ever seen. Grace cried through the entire ceremony, watching her firstborn promise his life to another. Ryder stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and whispered, "Our baby is all grown up." "They grow up so fast," she whispered back. "It feels like yesterday he was born." Thomas and Catherine built a small house on the expanded property, and soon enough they announced they were expecting a child of their own. Grace was going to be a grandmother. The thought filled her with joy and also a strange melancholy, a reminder of time passing, of seasons changing. When Thomas and Catherine's son was born, they named him Ryder Thomas, honoring both his grandfather and father. Grace held her grandson for the first time and felt the circle of life closing, opening, continuing. She thought about her own parents, gone so many years now. About Thomas Palmer, her first husband who had given her kindness when she needed it. About baby Thomas, named in his honor, who was now a father himself. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, watching her rock the baby. "About how life continues. About how we all become part of each other's stories. About how grateful I am for every moment of this life we've built." He kissed the top of her head. "Me too, love, me too." Rose never married, choosing instead to dedicate herself entirely to the garden. By the time she was 20, her flower breeding had gained recognition throughout Nevada and even into California. Botanists would come from San Francisco to study her methods, to see the roses that bloomed in the desert, the flowers that shouldn't have been able to survive, but did. She was happy in her choice, finding fulfillment in the work and in helping her parents. Grace understood it in a way that few others did. After all, the flowers had saved her once. Why shouldn't they be enough for her daughter? James, true to his bookish nature, eventually became a teacher in Piotch's small school. He married at 25 to a fellow teacher named Mary, and they had 3 daughters in quick succession. The Garrett property became a gathering place for the entire family, with children and grandchildren running through the gardens and stables. Grace and Ryder grew older together, silver hair and age spots, creaking joints and fading eyesight. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, each shared experience, each challenge overcome together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Grace by taking her back to that restaurant in Piotch where they had their first lunch together. The French couple who had run it were long gone, replaced by new owners, but the building was the same. They sat at a table by the window, just like they had 3 decades before, and ordered the best meal the restaurant offered. "You remember what you asked me that first day?" Grace said, smiling at the memory. "You asked why flowers, why I chose to sell flowers of all things. And you said it was because they were beautiful, because they were a reminder that gentle things still existed in a hard world. I still believe that, more now than ever. You brought so much beauty into my life, Grace. I was just drifting when I met you, going from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build something lasting. You did the same for me. I was just surviving, getting through each day. You taught me how to live again, how to hope again." They raised their glasses to each other, to 30 years of marriage, to the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. As they grew even older, into their 60s and then 70s, they began to slow down. The children took over more and more of the daily operations. Thomas managed the horses entirely now, with his own sons helping. Rose ran the garden with an efficiency that astounded everyone. James had become the principal of the school, respected throughout the community. But every evening, no matter what, Ryder and Grace would sit on their porch and watch the sunset together. It was their time, sacred and uninterrupted. They would hold hands and talk about their day, about the grandchildren, about memories from decades past. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked one evening. She was 70 now, her hair completely silver, her face deeply lined but still beautiful to Ryder. "Not a single one," he said firmly. He was 72, his hands gnarled from decades of work but still strong. "Every choice I made led me to you, and that makes every choice the right one. Even the hard times. Even when Thomas was sick with fever and we thought we might lose him. Even when the drought almost destroyed everything we had built. Even then. Because we got through it together and it made us stronger. Grace, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children and this life we built. I wouldn't change a single moment." She leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side as she had for 50 years. "I love you, Ryder Garrett. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Grace Garrett, forever and always." When Ryder was 78 and Grace was 76, he got sick. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, then weakness, then finally the doctor's grim diagnosis. His lungs were failing, likely from decades of breathing in dust and working hard in harsh conditions. Grace refused to leave his side. She moved a chair into their bedroom and sat with him day and night, holding his hand, reading to him, telling him stories about their life together. "I'm not afraid," he told her one afternoon. "I've had a good life, the best life. I got to love you and be loved by you. I got to watch our children grow and have children of their own. I got to build something that will last beyond me. A man can't ask for more than that." "Don't talk like that," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to get better. You have to get better." "Gracie, love, we both know that's not true, but it's all right. I'm at peace with it. I'm not ready to lose you. You won't lose me. I'll always be with you and our children in this place we built together. Every flower that blooms will be me loving you. Every sunset we watched will be me holding you. I'm not going anywhere, not really." He died 3 days later, on a spring morning with the window open and the scent of roses drifting in on the breeze. Grace was holding his hand, and his last word was her name. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her children surrounded her, held her up when she couldn't stand on her own. Her grandchildren brought her small comforts, flowers from the garden, drawings, stories. They buried Ryder on the property, in a spot he had chosen years before, under a large oak tree with a view of the mountains. Grace made sure his grave was covered in flowers, every kind that grew in their garden. It was the most spectacular arrangement anyone had ever seen. After the funeral, Thomas found his mother sitting by the grave, talking softly to his father. "Mom," he said gently, "you should come inside. It's getting cold." "In a moment, darling. I'm just telling your father about Rose's new hybrid. He would have loved it." Thomas sat down beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "He loved you so much. I hope Catherine and I have half the love you two shared." "You will. You already do. Your father and I, we were lucky. We found each other when we both needed someone most." "But love like that isn't luck, not really. It's choice. Every day we chose each other. That's what made it last." Grace lived another 8 years after Ryder died. They were good years in their own way. She continued to work in the garden, though with Rose's help more and more. She delighted in her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their great-grandfather, about the lonely cowboy who bought all her flowers and won her heart. She never remarried, never even considered it. Ryder had been her great love, her partner, her best friend. No one could replace that. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch alone, but not really alone. She could feel Ryder there beside her, could almost hear his voice telling her about his day. The sunset was always beautiful, painting the sky in those same golds and purples they had watched together for so many years. When Grace was 84, she died peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Ryder, in the house they had built together. Her children found her in the morning with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her dreams. They buried her next to Ryder, under the oak tree, and covered her grave with flowers just as she had done for him. The whole county came to the funeral, remembering the flower woman who had brought beauty to their harsh desert town, who had built something lasting from nothing but determination and love. Thomas stood at the grave with his siblings, looking at the simple headstones. Ryder Garrett, it said, beloved husband, father, and friend, and next to it Grace Garrett, beloved wife, mother, and friend. They loved each other so much, Rose said softly, tears streaming down her face. "I hope they're together now." "They are," Thomas said with certainty. "How could they not be? Love like that doesn't end just because life does." Years passed. The property stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The garden continued to bloom, tended by Rose until she was too old, then by her nieces and nephews. The horse operation thrived under Thomas's sons and grandsons. The house stood strong, sheltering generation after generation of Garretts. And on certain spring mornings, when the light was just right and the flowers were in full bloom, people said you could see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the garden. A cowboy and his flower woman, still together, still in love. Their story woven into the very soil they had worked so hard to make bloom. The town of Piotch eventually declined as the silver ran out, becoming a quiet place rather than the rough mining town it had once been. But the Garrett property remained, a testament to what 2 people could build together when they had love and determination and hope. In the family records, carefully maintained through the generations, there was a letter that Ryder had written to Grace on their 25th anniversary, which he had asked Thomas to make sure survived. In it, he had written about that first morning, about seeing her standing there with her flowers, looking so sad and so strong at the same time. "I bought every stem," he had written, hoping to make her smile. "I had no idea I was buying my own happiness, my own future, my own heart." She gave me everything, and all I had to do was see her, really see her and love her for exactly who she was. It was the easiest thing I ever did, and the best. And in Grace's journal, found after her death, she had written her own entry about that same morning. A cowboy bought all my flowers today. I thought he was strange, maybe even crazy. I had no idea he was buying more than flowers. He was buying a chance, a hope, a future. He was buying us. And I would sell him those flowers again every single day, because loving Ryder Garrett was the greatest gift of my life. Their love story became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. About the widow who sold flowers to survive, and the lonely cowboy who bought every stem in her heart with them. About how they built a life together from nothing, how they loved each other through every hardship, how they created something beautiful in a harsh world. And in the garden, among the roses and the wildflowers, the Indian paintbrush and the desert marigolds, their love continued to bloom, season after season, year after year, eternal as the desert itself. The end.